Hello and welcome to True North. My name is James, and today I need to talk to you about something that's been weighing heavily on my mind, and frankly, it should be on every Canadian's radar too. We're diving into the federal government's recent decision to pause the electric vehicle availability standard, also known as the EV mandate, for 2026 and launch a 60-day review of this critical climate policy. Now, I know policy talk isn't always the most exciting topic, but stick with me here because this decision affects every single one of us who cares about Canada's electric future. Let me set the stage for those who might not be familiar with what we're talking about. The electric vehicle availability standard was designed to ensure that automakers make electric vehicles available to Canadian consumers. Essentially, it would require manufacturers to meet specific targets for EV sales as a percentage of their total vehicle sales in Canada, starting at 20% for the 2026 model year and gradually increasing to 100% by 2035. This isn't just some bureaucratic checkbox. This policy was a cornerstone of Canada's plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And here's something important to understand. This is a consumer-first policy. It's designed to incentivize automakers to make better and more affordable zero-emission options available to us as Canadian consumers. But now the government has hit the pause button, citing the need for a comprehensive review to ensure the policy is practical and achievable. On the surface, that might sound reasonable, but let me tell you why this pause has me and many others in the EV community deeply concerned. First, let's talk timing. We're already in 2025, and the original implementation date was 2026. Pausing now creates massive uncertainty for automakers who have been planning their Canadian strategies around these requirements. Auto manufacturers need years of lead time to plan their model lineups, production schedules, and inventory allocation. This last-minute uncertainty could actually harm EV availability in Canada, not help it. The automotive industry thrives on predictability and long-term planning. When governments flip-flop on major policies like this, it sends a message that Canada might not be serious about its electrification goals. This could lead manufacturers to prioritize other markets like the EU or California, where they have more regulatory certainty. Think about it from a manufacturer's perspective. If you're deciding where to allocate your limited supply of the latest EV models, are you going to send them to a market where with clear, stable regulations, or one where the rules might change every few years? Here's a concrete example of what we're already missing out on. Canada is actually the only market in North America getting Kia's new EV5. Drivers in the US won't be able to buy one. That's partially because of the policy signals we've been sending. But if we keep flip-flopping on these standards, we might start losing those advantages. And let's look at what happened with some recent EV launches. Vehicles like the Fiat 500e, the Jeep Wagoneer S, and even the Ontario-built electric Dodge Charger were made available for purchases exclusively in Quebec and BC before other provinces. Why? Because those provinces have had strong, consistent EV sales regulations in place since 2016 and 2019 respectively. Here's the bigger picture that really concerns me. Transportation accounts for about 25% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, with passenger vehicles making up a huge chunk of that. The EV mandate wasn't just about making more electric cars available. It was a critical tool for meeting our climate commitments under the Paris Agreement. Every year we delay or water down these policies is another year we fall further behind on our climate goals. And let's be honest, we're already not on track to meet our 2030 emissions reduction targets. This pause feels like we're moving in the wrong direction when we should be accelerating our efforts. Now, I know some critics argue that the mandate could drive up vehicle prices or limit consumer choice. But here's what I've observed from covering the EV space. When automakers are required to bring EVs to market, competition increases and prices come down. A 2022 study by Environmental Defense found that Canada's EV availability standard would actually reduce the median price of electric vehicles by 20% by 2035. And this matters because a recent market survey by Clean Energy Canada and Abacus Data found that most Canadians are unwilling to spend more than $40,000 on a new EV. Look at what happened in Quebec with their ZEV mandate. They consistently have better EV selection and pricing than provinces without such requirements. In 2024, EVs accounted for 33% of new car sales in Quebec and 23% in BC, compared to the national average of just 15%. Meanwhile, Ontario, without a provincial mandate, sat at only 8%. Without the federal standard, we risk creating a patchwork system where some provinces get great EV options while others get left behind. That's not the Canada I want to see. For those of us already driving electric, this pause might not immediately affect our day-to-day experience, but it could impact future vehicle choices. Fewer new EV models might make it to Canada if manufacturers don't see regulatory pressure to bring them here. It's going to impact resale values. Uncertainty about future EV policies could affect how the used EV market develops. It's going to affect infrastructure development. Private companies making charging infrastructure investments often look at policy signals to gauge future demand. Now, let's zoom out and look at where Canada sits globally. The EU has aggressive EV mandates and currently offers 21 EV models under $40,000 Canadian, while Canada only has one. China's ZEV mandate has boosted their market so much that nearly 60% of all vehicle models on offer there today are electric. California and several U.S. states have their own zero-emission vehicle programs. Meanwhile, Canada, a country that should be leading on clean technology given our abundant clean electricity, is pausing to review whether we should require automakers to actually sell EVs here. And here's something that should really concern us. There's growing uncertainty about U.S. federal climate policies under the Trump administration, which is trying to scrap emission standards altogether. Any calls from industry that Canada should align with the U.S. could now mean we do nothing to regulate emissions from passenger vehicles. Our EV availability standard was the only pure policy Canada had to shape our vehicle mix beyond 2026. We risk being left behind in the global race toward electrification. And in an increasingly connected world economy, being a laggard in clean transportation technology could hurt our competitiveness in other sectors too. So what can we do about this? Here are some concrete steps. Make your voice heard. Contact your MP. Seriously, it takes 5 minutes, and elected officials do pay attention to constituent feedback. Tell them you support strong EV availability standards and you're concerned about this pause. Now, here's something that can make this even easier for you. The Manitoba Electric Vehicle Association has actually created a letter template that you can use to contact your MP about this issue. If you'd like to get a copy of that letter, just reach out to me at truenorthevpodcast@gmail.com and I'll send it your way. But honestly, if you don't use the template, just writing a simple letter or even making a phone call to tell your MP how this pause can and will affect you personally is incredibly powerful. Maybe you're planning to buy an EV in the next few years and you're worried about having fewer options. Maybe you're concerned about Canada falling behind on climate action. Whatever the reason, share it. Personal stories from constituents carry real weight. Now, second, engage in the review process. The government says this is a 60-day review with stakeholder consultation. Watch for opportunities to provide input and make the EV community's voice heard. Not just automotive industry lobbying, as they really seem to not want EVs, but they've already put the work in. 3. Support provincial action. While we wait for federal action, support strong provincial policies. Quebec, BC, and other provinces have shown that regional action can work. Even here in Manitoba, we saw even when the province brought in the provincial rebate, all of a sudden we had a whole bunch more EVs, and they were sitting on the lots of the dealerships available that you could take home that day. 4. Vote with your wallet. Keep buying EVs if you're in the market for a vehicle. Consumer demand is ultimately what drives change regardless of policy. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not saying this review will definitely result in a weakened standard. Maybe the government will come back in 60 days with an even stronger policy. Or maybe they'll add additional compliance pathways like extra credits for vehicles under a certain price point to help incentivize automakers to introduce lower cost EVs. But the uncertainty itself is problematic, and the delay sends the wrong signal at a critical time. Now, I want to address some of the misconceptions I've been hearing about this policy. First, some people are calling this a $20,000 gas tax on gas cars. That's completely false. That figure actually refers to a compliance flexibility where car makers can count investments in charging infrastructure on credits toward their EV targets. For every $20,000 they invest in new fast chargers, they get 1 credit. That is optional. That is not a penalty. Second, this policy doesn't ban gas vehicles. Plug-in hybrids are still allowed, and you'll still be able to buy used gas vehicles long after 2035. This only applies to new vehicle sales. You could still buy a steam-powered vehicle if you want. And third, let's talk about demand. Yes, Canadian EV sales slowed in 2025, but that's largely because federal, BC, and Quebec rebates were all paused earlier this year. When Quebec restarted the rebate program in April, EV sales in the province nearly doubled the following quarter. A recent poll found that most Canadians in EVs are simply waiting for rebates to return, especially since the federal government said they're going to bring back the EV rebate. They didn't say when, so yeah, it's going to slow down. The bigger picture, Canadian EV sales have increased by nearly 50% each year since 2020, compared to just 2% for gas-powered vehicles. Before the rebate pauses, Canada's EV sales shares had climbed to a record 18% in the final quarter of 2024. We need policymakers to understand that half measures and delays on climate action aren't just policy failures. They're economic failures too. The clean energy transition is happening with or without Canada. The question is whether we'll be leaders or followers. I encourage all of you listening to get involved in this conversation. Follow the review process, contact your representatives, and make it clear that Canadians want strong action on transportation emissions. And if you're part of a local EV group or organization, this is a great time to coordinate advocacy efforts. Organizations like the Manitoba Electric Vehicle Association, which you can find at manitobaev.ca, are doing important work to advocate for better EV policies. Look, I get it. Policy talk can be dry, and it's easy to think that these decisions don't affect us directly. But the truth is, the policies our government makes today will determine what kind of transportation system we have tomorrow. As EV drivers, we know the benefits of electric transportation: lower emissions, lower operating costs, better performance, and quieter operation. We shouldn't have to fight for the right to have good EV options available to buy. That should be a given in 2025. The EV mandate pause is more than just a policy delay. It's a signal about whether Canada is serious about being a leader in the clean economy. And frankly, we need to be doing better. So if you want to reach out, you could check out Manitoba Electric Vehicle Association at manitobaev.ca. You could find us on Facebook at True North EV. And you could email me if this impacts you at all at gmail.com. But before I wrap up, I've got to give a shout out for you to go check out Bodie's podcast at Kilowatt. He is way better and more knowledgeable than me, and he deals with more of the actual cars and the quarterly chats and all that with the cars, the car news. He's way better on the global scale of the EVs and what they're doing. And before you go, if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and just leave us a review. It really helps other EV enthusiasts find our shows. And if you have a topic you'd like us to cover, send your suggestion over at True North EV Podcast at gmail.com. As the show's for you and me. Thanks for listening to True North EV. I'm James, and I'll talk to you next time.